We are back on Inside Politics. Our guest today, Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University, history and political science professor there. We're talking about the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We're now into our 7th month of hostilities. Dr. Schwartz, the U.S. and the European allies have continued to provide billions of dollars for weapons and aid. There were doubts about how much of that would actually happen, but these continuing efforts have perhaps become one of the critical factors in this war.
Absolutely, the scale of American assistance has become much greater. The willingness of the Europeans to assist as well, particularly Eastern Europeans, to provide aid, to provide help for the refugees, all of this, it has led to a strong sense of both American and European solidarity and support. And for the most part, although certainly the Ukrainians have wanted more and constantly asked for more, it has led to, I think, especially recently with these HIMARS that the United States has been providing, it has led to Ukrainian military success.
And more aid packages appear to be on the way. One totaling $675 million was announced this week. There's another $2 billion proposal roughly that's waiting congressional approval. Doesn't appear to be any opposition to any of this in Washington, but as these ongoing huge amounts of money are being spent, eventually, is that sustainable? Eventually, are we going to have some pushback about that?
That's a fascinating point, because for the time being, outside of very extreme voices on the far left or right, you do have this bipartisan consensus that as long as the Ukrainians are fighting and willing to continue to fight, that there is this support within the United States. It does seem, for a point, that it might not be sustainable, but I would hazard a guess that this could go on for quite some time.
There were concerns that the Ukrainians would not know how to use the more sophisticated weapon systems that are being given now by the U.S. That hasn't happened. Is it because the U.S. has been providing training?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, I would surmise that some of that training might even come close to, well, probably not come close to violating any particular neutrality or law or keeping American personnel.
We don't have any advisors over there helping them shoot those things.
Yeah, probably not, but I would imagine they're as close as possible they can be to help.
There were some concerns that the Ukrainians might not know how to use them, and also there was some concern if the U.S. provided these non-nuclear kind of things, that it might make the Russians too mad. Nobody defined what too mad was, but has that fear gone away?
I think it certainly has lessened considerably. That the hesitation that you saw in President Biden, for example, early on about this fears that how the Russians would behave seems to have really largely evaporated, and you get more and more very determined statements by the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, saying we are going to help, and even statements about defeating Russia in Ukraine, which was not the case early on. Now
there's word that the Russians are receiving missiles, other weapons, and ammunition from North Korea. Is that surprising? Did you think North Korea would be a sign for are they running out of ammunition from Russia?
I think what some have argued is that Russia is having real problems in supply and getting weaponry to its troops, and that it is one reason why it was not only North Korea but getting Iranian drones, that it's not as capable militarily, that its supplies. Again, this goes back to their assumption that they didn't need to have the type of supply line and readiness because they expected the war to be a short one.
Are the Iranian drones not working very well? Or some technical problems?
There have been some technical problems, and undoubtedly the United States also has some intelligence that's been able to share with the Ukrainians on how to stop the Iranian drones.
The Russians have done well when they can concentrate, particularly their heavy artillery. Yes, is that still an advantage for them? Would the Russians go back to doing what they did before, where they basically laid siege to these big cities, and they seem to have gone away from that for whatever reason?
Well, they've conquered, as you mentioned, they've conquered a lot of the territory that is at least supposedly what they claim was the original mission. I mean, they've shifted their understanding from a conquest of all of Ukraine to the idea of getting Luhansk and Donetsk and then the southern areas, and in that sense, they could go back to the simple shelling, but they don't necessarily have to, since they've now occupied those cities.
There are also reports that NATO and Europe are running low on weapons themselves and perhaps ammunition, so this is a problem for both sides?
I don't think it's as severe on the American European side. I think some of the problems on the European side had to do with very thin backlogs of supplies, for example, in Germany, which has not been a very good in keeping up its armed forces. But I don't think the supply issue is as serious at all for the West as it is for Russia.
What's China providing? I know the Russians have tried to get them more involved. China, are they more concerned right now about their economy and their ongoing COVID problems?
It's interesting because China, of course, has expressed solidarity with Putin. He's going to meet with Xi Jinping this week, but it does not seem as though the Chinese are scared that if they provide too direct military assistance, you're going to run into the sanctions, the type of sanctions that they don't want to necessarily have against their own economy.
But is it telling that after China got really mad when Speaker Pelosi went over to Taiwan and Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee went over there as well, they did not announce more aid for Russia as sort of an immediate get back at the U.S., but they've said nothing about that.
No, I think that China is clearly approaching this much more cautiously than some have argued, even with all the issues related to the United States and Taiwan. So China is going to act in its own national interest, and while it sees support for Russia as helpful, it's not going to do things that might compromise that national interest.
Is now the big unknown going forward is what happens during the winter, how that will shake out for both sides? Is that going to be the next big unpredictable thing that will do this one way or the other?
I think so, unless the Ukrainians are more successful militarily and take additional territory such that the Russians really are in a position of retreat. I think the real question will be solidarity over the winter. If Europe can make it through the winter without serious dislocation of its energy resources, that will be really key.
Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for being with us. I'm sure we'll have you back again to update as we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on Inside Politics. We'll be back here again for a future show. If you can't get enough politics in the meantime, you can go to the website. You'll find my Capitol U commentary there. New commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.